Hello, and welcome to The Brief, a video podcast that offers different perspectives and a closer look behind the scenes of current global issues. I'm your host, Jim Clancy. As always, we appreciate a like or a follow, and you can find links to more of our episodes at thebriefpodcast.org. We've been focused on the catastrophe in Gaza since the events of October 7th, when Hamas stunned Israel by breaking out of the enclave, attacking military posts, and committing horrific war crimes against civilians in southern Israel. It is estimated more than 1,200 Israelis were killed. Hundreds more were taken captive. It unleashed a furious military retaliation by Israel that has now completely devastated Gaza and killed more than 60,000 people, about two-thirds of them civilian, women, and children. Countless war crimes have been committed and continue daily. We're going to focus on that. But in this episode, we're also going to focus on the man that many say could bring all of this to an end, President Donald Trump. He's arguably transformed U.S. politics, ignited disputes with America's closest allies, and disrupted the very foundations of U.S. democracy. Our guest in this episode of The Brief is Stephen Walt. He's a world-renowned professor of international affairs at Harvard. He is also the kind of realist who helps us see through the political spin and the ideological distortion in our world today. Professor Walt, hello, and welcome once again to The Brief.
Nice to be back.
Well, I've got so many topics to cover here. A lot of it has to do with Trump 2.0 and what we're witnessing in the United States. But there's no way that I can start without discussing this, I call it a catastrophe that's underway in Gaza, a complete debacle. How's it playing out in your view?
Oh, it's I think debacle is a good word, and a situation of enormous and sustained cruelty now that is not going to improve the situation in the Middle East, is not going to help America's position in the world, isn't going to make Americans safer or more secure, and is, I think, an enormous moral stain, not unique, but an enormous moral stain on the entire international community to watch a genocide unfold against many innocent Palestinians. And to do that with the active support of the United States is even more worrisome.
It comes down to the rules-based order, and it doesn't seem to matter. I mean, the United States, Europe, they've talked about this. They've talked about never again for decades. And yet it's all out the window now. And people are asking, why isn't someone doing something to really stop this?
That's right. I mean, this is not the first time that the international community has failed to respond to an unfolding and horrific, human catastrophe. But this has been now, going on for 2 years plus, more than 50,000 people at least killed, and a certain amount of pious, hand-wringing in world capitals, but hardly any real action. And as I said before, it's not that the United States has been doing anything to substantial to try and stop it, despite the enormous leverage we have. It's not as though Europeans have done very much to try and stop it, although they have a leverage that they could exercise as well. And therefore, when the West tries to lecture the rest of the world about norms and rules and principles and human rights, the rest of the world has every reason to pay no attention whatsoever to what we are saying. So again, I think, we look back 20 or 30 years from now, this will be seen as a watershed moment when the post-World War II order, imperfect as it was, but one that still tried to advance a certain set of basic human rights norms, we'll look back on this period as a place where that was, I think, irreparably damaged.
Nothing is more telling, in that aspect than the fact that starvation has been used apparently as a weapon, and it's worse now than ever. It is so bad that this group that was concocted together with the U.S., it's a U.S. private company, we're told, but the Israelis were deeply involved in it as well. For security reasons, they wanted to oversee this plan. Well, now everybody's looking at, the slaughter of civilians, hungry people coming unarmed, trying to get some aid, and they end up being shot at these feeding centers. And we even have this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation now asking the UN to come back in.
Right. I mean, part of this reflects the fact that once you dismantle whatever political structures are governing a particular area, unless you have something well established to replace it with, you're going to get chaos. But I think we shouldn't forget that this is part of, I think, a larger Israeli campaign for which, the Hamas attack provided the opportunity to essentially advance a broader agenda that goes back many years. I think there are really two goals here. One is the removal of Palestinians as a meaningful political force, not their eradication, physical eradication, but to essentially eliminate the Palestinians as a political community that people have to take seriously. And this is happening in Gaza, obviously, but also happening in the West Bank as well. And that's, of course, part of the effort to establish a greater Israel, to eventually incorporate the West Bank as a full-fledged part of Israel itself. The difficulty that is always faced is that if you look at the areas that Israel currently controls, to include Gaza, the population is roughly divided 50-50 between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs. And that has never been that's a political problem Israel's never been able to solve. This is, I think, an attempt by Netanyahu and the more extreme members of his coalition to achieve a political solution to that. The second part of this, which we'll probably get into, is I think Israel has taken the opportunity to try and establish a position of regional dominance. So it's not just going after Hamas, but the attacks on Hezbollah, the attacks on Syria, the recent attack aided by the United States on Iran, all part of that effort as well. It finally has the ancillary benefit of keeping Benjamin Netanyahu out of jail, or at least delaying his possible removal on legal grounds. So you put all those things together and you have a recipe for, again, enormous cruelty as we've been watching.
Now, Israel looks at all of this and they're, number one, Israelis feel that when this is over, it'll all be forgotten. Every terrible act that was committed will be overlooked, and things will go back to the way that they were. And they have benefited, taken comfort in an uncommon amount of impunity for what they do in the field. Now, this goes all across all the neighbors in the region, and they see themselves as a new power, a new hegemon.
I think that's right, and that's certainly you see some of that triumphalism in some Israeli rhetoric, and I think that view is shared by some of Israel's supporters here in the United States. I think, first of all, this isn't going to solve the political problem posed by the Palestinians. They will still be there. Millions of them, are going to be present in lands that Israel still controls. But second, despite Israel's military prowess, it's too small, doesn't have enough people to dominate the entire region. All right, it's a population of roughly 9 or 10 million, of 20% of which is Arab, not Israeli Jews. And they're surrounded by hundreds of millions of Arabs. So 10 million people are not going to be able to permanently dominate these countries, even if they have military superiority at the moment. But secondly, Israel is still heavily dependent on support from the United States. And you might say, well, that support is ironclad. But if you look carefully, even in the United States, support for Israel is starting to decline. That's certainly true in the Democratic Party, which is now, I think, increasingly divided on the question of whether Israel should get unconditional support from the United States. But you're starting to see cracks in the Republican Party as well. People that you might think of as part of the MAGA coalition, the sort of Tucker Carlsons and others of the world, raising real questions about this. And that's especially true among younger Americans, again, across the political spectrum as well. So if Israeli domination of the Middle East is dependent on continued, sustained, generous, unconditional American support, I don't think that's something Israel can necessarily count on over time. Third point I'd make is Iran has been badly damaged, and its proxies, of course, very badly damaged, but it has not been defeated. It's a country of 80 to 90 million people. The recent American and Israeli attacks, I think, have given Iran even greater incentive to eventually try and get nuclear weapons, to turn a latent nuclear program into a real nuclear weapons program. And that would be, I think, a real obstacle to Israeli domination. And one final thing I'd just throw in here is it seems to me what we've seen for the last couple of years throughout the region, but especially in Gaza, is precisely the kind of thing that would reignite sort of jihadism, reignite the kind of al-Qaeda-style terrorism. And this, I think, is something that greatly worries a number of Arab governments. It's one of the reasons they have been distancing themselves from Israel, is they are worried about being perceived by some in their own populations as complicit in what's going on. So you put all this together, and I think the idea that Israel can exist as a regional hegemon, completely unconstrained, able to do whatever it wants, is a pipe dream. It may be true temporarily for the moment, but it's not likely to be a lasting condition.
Well, enter into all of this Donald Trump, who would love to be a Middle Eastern autocrat, and has more or less said the same thing, praised their looks, praised their countries, praised their accomplishments. But people say he may be the one guy who could bring this to an end. And he did bypass Netanyahu, negotiated directly with Hamas. The outcome of that, Steve Witkoff is out trying to make it happen. But Trump is in a unique position there, isn't he?
I think that's true. We should probably get into Trump and his whole approach to foreign policy in due course. Trump's great advantage is I don't think he cares at all about any of the actors in the region. He has no emotional attachment to the Saudis, to Israel, to the Gulf states, whatever. He is, in this sense, completely transactional. Very different than Biden, right, who did have this sort of strong connection to Israel, partly political, but I think partly genuine and emotional. Liked to describe himself as an ardent Zionist, and he meant it. Trump doesn't have any of that. He's not, again, emotionally committed there. So he would, throw anybody over the side if he thought it would be to his advantage. I think he doesn't see putting real pressure on Israel to his advantage. If he did, he could already have done so. And I think he's been persuaded by his advisors and perhaps by others that, he wants to stay as removed from this process personally as possible. It was true in the first term. He didn't really want to get involved in the peace process. He turned that over to his son-in-law to try and negotiate some kind of deals there. I think he's always understood that this is just a morass that many presidencies have foundered on. So yes, I think he has the potential to do it and might have the emotional makeup. But I don't expect to see any sort of big peace arrangement coming out of all of this. The final part of this is, this is actually an incredibly complicated conflict. If you think the taproot of much of the current trouble is still the unresolved conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, solving that is not easy. It involves immense, detailed, complex negotiations. And what we know about Donald Trump is he doesn't do details, right? He doesn't have the patience. He likes to show up and make a lot of promises, but not actually do the hard work. We've seen that, in his approach to Ukraine as well. So, yes, in theory, Donald Trump might be the president who could, get his Nobel Prize by bringing conflict in the Middle East to an end, but I don't think he's likely to deliver. There's nothing in his track record to suggest that he will.
When we look at Donald Trump, it's a very different Trump 2.0 than a lot of people, including yourself, really thought was going to happen. Why?
I think most of us underestimated the degree to which he would come in and pursue a completely radical agenda, far more radical than in his first term. And I think in particular on economic policy, the thing I think I got most wrong was I thought he would do some strange things in domestic politics. I thought he would do some unfortunate things in foreign policy, but I thought the economic policy would be fairly sensible, more moderate than it has proved to be. Now, It's true that so far Trump's bark has been worse than his bite on tariffs and things like that. But I think, there he's been more extreme. And the thing I think is now completely clear is he learned a lot in his first term about where the fault lines in the American governing structure were, and he came back in prepared to go after existing institutions with the full backing of a Republican Party that is completely subservient to him. So this is, I think, the most radical American presidency we have ever seen, in that they are trying to transform the nature of the American state, I think move us much closer to autocracy or an illiberal democracy. And again, they're not getting any pushback from Republicans, and that's
he's ruling by fiat. He's ruling by all these executive orders, and with a compliant majority GOP in the House and Senate, he's doing it with relative ease.
I think that's exactly right. And, again, he understood much better that he had the opportunity to do some of these things. And unlike his first term, where he didn't really have a team of people he could put in key positions, in his second term, he has appointed loyalists or sycophants or people he knows he can intimidate and browbeat, like Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So he's got a team that will do his bidding. And defend it at every turn, a Supreme Court that is willing to give him enormous authority. And I think the larger point I'd make is that we are now learning that Donald Trump is simultaneously a remarkable politician whose political skills have been underestimated ever since he came down that elevator in Trump Tower, and a terrible president. That is to say, he is able to amass political power and, take over the Republican Party in a variety of ways. And then the decisions he makes with that authority, I think, are doing enormous harm to the country and will eventually be seen as probably one of the most critical moments when America began to really slide, not out of the ranks of the great powers by any means, but away from the position of global influence that we've had for, 50 to 75 years.
Well, when I look at it, I mean, shocked, of course, by the way that he went after Mexico and Canada, our two closest trading partners, and singled them out for even suggesting that one should become a state. Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. But I look at this, and I hear Stephen Walt saying, the Europeans need to stand up and they need to be more, independent and have their own policies. And that's what they're doing now because of Trump.
Yeah, there's no question about that, that there are certain aspects, and this goes back all the way to the first term, certain aspects of America's global position, I think Trump intuited. I mean, he understood, as his predecessors had, that American allies needed to do more to defend themselves. They were too dependent on the United States. The United States was, in fact, overcommitted in various ways. And they understood this, and they tried to push them a little bit, but by and large didn't do enough. And Trump was willing to do that, was willing to make it clear to Europeans and to some degree others in Asia that they needed to step up and do more. So that was right. But the way in which he's gone about doing this, I think, will have enormous negative consequences. Just a couple of examples. I mean, two of the most pro-American countries in the world a year ago were Canada and Denmark. And of course, Canada is now in a full flower of a sort of anti-American, national, patriotic resistance to the pressure that the Trump administration has put on them. Similarly, Denmark, arguably the most pro-American country in Europe, is now deeply worried and deeply upset by Trump's claims that maybe we should just take Greenland from them. A sort of active imperialism we haven't seen since the 19th century, and this is not healthy. This is not a good step as well. And then finally, the administration claims to be very worried about China as a long-term rival. They should be. And yet, at the same time that they want Asian countries like Japan and South Korea and others to do more on defense, they're also launching a trade war with these countries, which both alienates their societies and makes it harder for them to spend more on defense. So again, even where Trump has had some good instincts on how to handle foreign policy, the way in which he tends to go about them is counterproductive. And I haven't even gotten into all the things he's doing here in the United States that I think will be of long-term harm.
Well, I want to talk about one of those. It's close to your heart, well, close to where you sit, and that is Harvard University in court trying to claw back some of the $2 billion in research funds that were given to the university. And the Trump administration, I mean, they have come after Harvard as an example. There are many other universities that are involved. Others have capitulated. Harvard is trying to stand up best as it can. What's going on? What do you see there as the perils for what he's setting in motion here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is a standard move in the autocrat's playbook. And I think it's now completely clear that Trump would prefer a world of no rules, unconstrained power, where he gets to do pretty much whatever he wants. And by the way, enrich himself even further in the process. So that's part of what's going on. And what they're doing with respect to universities is essentially identical to what other autocrats like Viktor Orban in Hungary and, Vladimir Putin in Russia have done to independent universities in those societies as well. There's probably an element of personal vendetta here. He has an old feud with Penny Pritzker, who's the head of the Harvard Corporation, and that may be fueling it as well. But the motivation, which is not entirely personal, is, if you can get Harvard to bend the knee, if you can get them to compromise and say, okay, the government can take over control of our curriculum or have a big say on who we hire or interfere in other ways, you can get Harvard to go along with that, then the rest of American higher education will go along as well. The challenge here is, this is basically an administration shooting the United States in the head because American higher education has been one of the most important sources of American power, prosperity, and global influence for a century or more. Having the world's leading universities, the world's most advanced scientific and technological establishment has been an enormous benefit. It's where all that innovation comes from. Right? And to say we have this wonderful asset, by the way, an asset that brings money into the United States. International students brought in $43 billion in the United States last year through higher education. Trump worries about trade deficits. This is something that he should not be interfering with. In any case, to go after this potential or this incredibly important set of institutions is completely counterproductive if what you're worried about is America's long-term position. It's the exact antithesis of making America great. It's making America progressively weaker. And in fact, what we'll see is the exact opposite of what we've benefited from. The United States for 100 years has done very well by attracting some of the smartest people in the world, some of the world's leading scientists to come to the United States and do their work here. That's going to have a reverse effect. American scientists are going to start going to other universities where they don't have to worry about an arbitrary president or a bunch of his minions cutting off their funding for no particular reason as well.
Or their visas.
Yeah, or the visas for foreign students and foreign researchers. And, this is one of those things I can explain it analytically, but I can't come up with a decent justification for it. I understand that, Trump doesn't want independent sources of thought and criticism out there. I understand that people like Stephen Miller think that, these are, bastions of wokeism that are undermining the American dream, etc., which is, I think, largely nonsense. But I don't understand why more people in the administration don't realize how counterproductive this is and why members of the House and Senate, including Republicans, don't fully understand that the last thing you want to do is make it harder for the United States to compete with countries like China, they understand that science and technology is the key to power and influence. And if you understand that, why you would go after American universities doesn't make any sense to me.
One Australian official put it like this, saying that Trump was providing them with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reverse a brain drain from their countries and put it in the opposite direction. So American students, American researchers, young ones who need long-term funding would come over to these countries and participate in their research there, allowing countries like Australia or China. China offered one researcher, I think, 20 years of unfettered funding if they would move their entire operations and their entire research to China instead of in the United States. He declined, but when you see people out there making those kinds of offers, you see that there's a lot of value the United States, and with the leadership of Donald Trump, is giving up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, it's not just Australia, it's not just China. Great Britain has moved in this direction. Canada has moved in this direction. France is trying to do this as well. And if this policy, this headlong assault on American higher education continues, that tendency or that trend is only going to increase. It's not like American colleges are all going to shut down. It's not like no scientific research will be done in the United States. But it's not going to be as accomplished. It's not going to do as much, and we are handing scientific and technological supremacy over to other countries, and we're doing it voluntarily. That's the amazing part about it. This is being done by a deliberate act of public policy, and again, I find it baffling that any president who claims to want the United States to be number one, claims to want to retain our position, claims to want to make America great again, would actually go along with something like this.
Let's examine the roots of it a little bit, because the excuse that's being given, and we've talked about this before, is that anti-Semitism on the campus of Harvard is a real problem, such a problem that I'm sure that Miriam Adelson was thinking about that when she gave Donald Trump $100 million for his campaign. And he's acted upon that. He keeps his promises to the Adelsons. That's how we got our embassy all the way into Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. And yet there's a lot of people are questioning, saying, is it really that big of a problem? And should we really be paying that much attention?
Yeah. I think this is not, I don't want to say it's entirely mythical, but it's been enormously exaggerated. This idea that American universities, and in particular Harvard University, are somehow hotbeds of anti-Semitism is just nonsense. Just a few bits and pieces. Three of the last four presidents of Harvard University were Jewish. 5 of the 9 deans of Harvard schools today are Jewish. There are an enormous number of Jewish students and faculty, and the vast majority of them, enjoy the university, are fully supported. It is, in fact, one of the more philo-Semitic institutions I've ever been at, and I think that's wonderful, by the way. So what this, it's a large community, and especially when you have something like the Gaza war going on, you had students who were very incensed by what they saw, protesting in a variety of ways. Many of those students, I might add, being Jewish Americans, right? And within a large community, you're going to get some people who cross lines, say dumb things, etc. But the idea that this has created an atmosphere where people feel uncomfortable or where normal life doesn't go on is, again, I think, completely fallacious. And if I have one criticism of the Harvard administration, going back even to before the current president, is that we should have done more to push back on this set of accusations. Acknowledge that, yes, there might be some isolated incidents. If you have a large community, particularly a large community, many of whom are young people who don't necessarily always have the greatest judgment, you're going to get some moments. And then you deal with them the way you deal with any kind of internal discipline problem, as Harvard has done. But I think now this is being used purely as an excuse to keep putting pressure on the institution. And one of the things I think we are learning about the administration is trying to accommodate them doesn't accomplish anything. Colombia basically surrendered and discovered that they were facing a new set of demands. It didn't get them anywhere. A bunch of big law firms decided to compromise with the administration and got a new set of demands after that. So I think one of the lessons here is you really can't appease these people by constantly acknowledging part of their accusations and saying you're going to do something about it. You have to push back much more vigorously. And I hope the administration at Harvard continues to stand up for the basic principles of academic freedom and independent thought.
When I talk to Americans, everybody seems to comment on the chaos that abounds in this Trump administration, the uncertainty. You've got Taco Trump, he's always going to chicken out. This is particularly true of the tariffs. But other people just see that there was an insider who said that the reason that Trump pronounces one thing one day, reverses it the next, he likes being in the headlines. And if he can make a dramatic statement, he's going to be on the news. He's going to crowd out other things, including questions about Jeffrey Epstein or whatever. But the real focus here is that he's a bit like P.T. Barnum, and he's running his show.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I even thought that one of the reasons, I don't think this is the only reason, but one of the reasons that Trump ultimately decided to get involved in the Israeli war against Iran was that, once again, that put the attention back on Trump. And certainly the way he has handled tariffs is a classic illustration of, sort of the bright, shiny object with which he can always get news attention. So, if he announces new tariffs, that's the headline. If he relaxes the tariffs, that's the headline. If he suspends them for a day or two or a week or a couple of months, that's the headline. It doesn't matter what the decision is. The media goes into a tizzy. And once again, he's in the spotlight. And that's what I meant when I said, we've discovered he really is a brilliant politician. He has understood enough about how social media, how mainstream media, how other institutions are operating, and is very good at coming up with statements, initiatives, sometimes outrageous, that nonetheless keep the camera focused on him. I think perhaps his career as a reality TV star may have contributed to how much he learned here. And adding to that, I would just say, this is a man whose entire career, really, in business and in politics has been based on being able to persuade enough people that he was something that he wasn't. Persuade enough bankers that he's really a good businessman when it turns out he really wasn't particularly good. Convince enough voters that he's really going to do things for them, even though what he's really doing is enriching himself and his buddies, etc. And he's been brilliant at it, much better than almost any of his rivals. Convince people that he really didn't try to overturn the 2020 election. He really did win it legitimately. Many people actually believe that, even though it's without any factual basis. So I think you have to acknowledge the political gifts. And the great tragedy is that those political gifts are not married with a more well thought out, sensible, knowledgeable, well-informed set of policy initiatives that he could implement given the political position he's in if he wasn't so convicted or committed to self-dealing and to a otherwise kind of bizarre set of political and economic policies.
It is amazing. I mean, when I look at, the club that Don Jr. started for, you can join for $500,000, and presumably you'll get the president's ear at some point because it's, the president's son that's in there. Things that Hunter Biden was accused of, it is all being repeated in the open. Cryptocurrency, meme coins, Bibles, watches, you name it. I guess the American presidency was never meant for that. It just feels wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think we are discovering that there were some some real flaws in the American Constitution. There were more chinks in the armor. I think many of us thought that, we had this well-developed constitutional structure, checks and balances, politicians who, yes, they would be self-interested, but also had larger commitments to the national interest, to the broader good of society, and a set of norms, a set of principles, that made people, ashamed of themselves if they violated them. A well-established set of political norms that, even someone like Richard Nixon ultimately would subscribe to in various ways. And the United States in the 21st century, I think, unfortunately, is showing that those norms have been undermined. Not entirely by the Republican Party. Both parties have some share of the blame here. But Donald Trump has become the apotheosis of this. I mean, he has shown just how far you can go if you're willing to ignore all the rules and basically say to the system, try and stop me. I'll try to get away with everything I possibly can, and unless somebody actually stops me, I probably will. And what we've discovered is, so far, hardly anyone is willing to genuinely stand up and stop him. Some judges, yes. Occasionally, Democrats have been able to organize opposition. It's worth remembering he did lose the 2020 election because he'd done such a bad job in his first term. But in his second term, I think he has shown just how far you can get if you have a loyal team, a compliant party, control of both houses, a largely compliant Supreme Court, and a certain degree of shamelessness. That can get you a long way.
Barely 6 months into Trump 2.0, I've got to ask you, what would be the legacy? I mean, with his base, I guess he'll always be adored by his base, but how's America, how are the historians going to look back on this and describe this era of, well, as most people tell me, chaos?
Obviously this depends entirely on how this plays out, and we have to acknowledge at least the possibility that, maybe we're wrong. Maybe he'll somehow, stumble through, or that he's onto something that, we've all missed. But I think I think historians will look back on this period as the place where the thing that people have worried about for a long time, the eventual end of American global dominance, this is where it really began. Right? It was maintained, throughout the Clinton administration, Bush administration, Obama administration. The United States was still in a remarkable position, 20 to 25% of the world economy, alliances in Europe and Asia that we led and had largely good relationships with. We had some problems, we made some mistakes, etc. But any country would have traded places with us if given the opportunity. And I think we will now look back on this period as one where, first of all, as I said, some of the sinews of American power, science and technological dominance, a set of alliances that we could count on, etc. All of these things are going to be rapidly undermined. Secondly, I believe that there is an economic day of reckoning coming. That the tariff policies and other things they're introducing into the U.S. economy, greatly increasing the U.S. deficit, all of these things are going to come back to haunt us in a variety of different ways as well. So I think he may get out of his second term with a base that still adores him, but I think his successors are going to have enormous sets of problems to try and deal with, and will find it also a much less forgiving world than it was before. One of the central challenges we're going to face is getting other countries to trust the United States again. That wasn't that hard for Biden, because other countries could look at the first Trump term and say, well, that was this odd period. America would never do that again, would they? But of course, having done it again, it's going to be much harder to persuade the rest of the world that we won't elect someone like that again. Down the road. I think all of this will be viewed by future historians as, a sort of an unfortunate moment. And by the way, all of this assumes that we continue to be a democracy. a genuine democracy where where the ruling parties don't rig elections, where autocrats don't just stay in power forever. I think if Trump had a chance, he's hinted at this, he might think about a third term. He might think about creating a political dynasty designating his sons. I don't think we can rule out the possibility that the United States in 20 years is no longer, genuinely democratic. And elections are no longer a reflection of the people's will. And if so, he will be seen as the person who pulled that, who caused that to happen.
Stephen Walt, Professor of International Affairs at Harvard University, thank you very much for sharing a lot of your ideas here with us on The Brief.
Nice talking with you, Jim, as always.
And thank you for joining us. Please explore many of our other episodes of The Brief podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Give us a like or subscribe. For a complete listing, you can find more information at thebriefpodcast.org. For now, I'm Jim Clancy, and you've been briefed.